It is the season after Epiphany, these numbered days between Christmas and the beginning of Lent. Our spiritual task in this ordinary time is anything but ordinary. For this season asks us to come face to face with the extraordinary truth that Jesus Christ is in our midst. Sometimes we say that Christmas celebrates the incarnation, and this is what we mean by that. The word incarnation means to be found in flesh and blood human form. So, for example, we might say, I just loved Mr. Rogers when I was a kid. He was the very incarnation of goodness and patience. Or we might say, man, those Packers fans, they are the very incarnation of crazy. As Christians, our proclamation is that Jesus, the baby born in Bethlehem and laid in a manger, is the very incarnation of God. God in human form, God flesh and blood just like us, God with us, right beside us through all of our human needs and our frailties, all of our human joys and sorrows. Then we get to the day of Epiphany, which is January 6th. And this season that we're in now, the season following, and the focus shifts slightly. Whereas before, we were looking for glimpses of God. Is God really among us? Oh, yes, there God is, and there, and there, and there, we said. Now we are asking, okay, so what does it mean? Jesus is here, fine. How does that affect us? What difference does it make in our lives? In short, this season invites us, dare I say it challenges us, to get curious about Jesus. But a word of warning. Getting curious about Jesus might just require us to change. That was true for the fishermen disciples we met last week. Their whole lives turned upside down and inside out once they became curious about Jesus. And as we will see today, it will be true for us too, because Jesus invites us, dare I say he challenges us, to leave our old ways behind, our old thinking behind. Jesus invites us, Jesus challenges us to broaden our perspectives, to see the world in new and different ways. I learned another new thing this week. You know, we use these glasses during Advent to remind us to look for glimpses of God, and I think maybe we should use them this season to remind us to be curious. Always on the lookout for new things that we can learn, all the very many new things there are to learn. The world is our oyster. We do have a handful of these beauties left. If you didn't pick one up during Advent and regret it now, I know you all regret it now. They're on the back table in the narthex. So I learned this new thing. In Hebrew, the name for Egypt is Mizraim. Perhaps I learned this long ago, but it definitely didn't stick. I guess I just thought Egypt was Egypt. But no, and I now know that that word Egypt comes to us from the Greek word aguptos, which originally was the name for an ancient but very imposing and magnificent temple that used to be on the banks of the river Nile in the city of Memphis in Egypt. And so that was the name of the temple, but over time in the Greek-speaking world, that name Aguptos, where we get Egypt from, became to describe the whole country of Egypt. But in Hebrew, that land is called Mizraim. And here's what's so very interesting about Mizraim. The word literally means the narrow place. The narrow place. From the Hebrews' perspective, Egypt is the narrow place. Probably originally that had to do with geography, but think about it deeper. Mizraim, the narrow place, on a metaphorical level or an emotional level, a psychological level, even a spiritual level, Egypt truly was a narrow place for the Hebrew people. Egypt was the place where they were bound, where they were shackled in the chains of slavery. The people had originally gone to Egypt because of a famine in the land of Israel, and for a time they lived side by side with the Egyptians. But then a new Pharaoh rose to power, and he enslaved the people. They were treated harshly. They were whipped and beaten and abused and forced to do hard labor. Egypt became for them a narrow place, a confining place. A place of shackles and pain, Mizraim, the narrow place. At one point, Pharaoh even passed a sickening decree that all babies born to Hebrew women be killed. The people groaned in their misery in that miserable Mizraim, that narrow place. They cried out to God. They longed for, they were desperate for release from their narrow place. To fast forward through the story, God acts. God sends Moses down to Egypt with the charge to say to Pharaoh, anybody remember? Let my people go. And eventually, after 10 plagues that come upon the land of Egypt, finally the Hebrews escape that narrow place as they cross the Red Sea on dry ground and take their first steps into freedom, their first steps into this new life that God has placed before them. But there's a problem. They are free, yes. They have escaped Mizraim, that horrible, miserable, narrow place. But now they find themselves in the wilderness. Now they are hungry. Now they are thirsty. Now they are lost. Now they are tired. Now they are scared. And guess what happens? They begin to miss their narrow place. Oh, don't you remember, they whine and moan, how great it was in our narrow place. Don't you remember that, how we had meat to eat in the land of Egypt? This was the Numbers chapter 11 reading that we just had. Don't you remember in Mizraim all the fish we could possibly eat, and the cucumbers, and the melons, and the leeks, and the onions, and the garlic. You know the power of our narrow places when garlic is the temptation. It was a bountiful feast there in Mizraim. It was a bountiful feast there in our narrow place. We miss it. We miss Mizraim because here, the people say with contempt, here there is nothing. Here there is nothing at all. This is the thing about our narrow places. We like them. We like them because we know them. It is easy in our narrow places, sort of, because the reality is that there is great dis-ease in confinement, but often we can't recognize that while we're bound up in it. Our narrow places are familiar to us, and sometimes there is great comfort in familiarity, even when it is toxic, even when it shackles us. Even when our narrow places do damage to ourselves and to others, even when they keep us from the new life that God has placed before us, we like our Mizraim. We like our narrow places. They are our places, after all, narrow or not. And we cling to them because they are what we know. We cling to them because it takes energy to break free from the narrow places. We cling to them because bumping up against the new ventures, new views, new directions, new ideas, new perspectives, all of that feels, well, new. And there is uncertainty in the new. It is scary in the new. Or at least disorienting. It can feel like wilderness in the new. It can feel like turmoil in the new. All of the things we used to take for granted, all of the assumptions we used to make about the way the world works and our place in it, all that feels threatened when we are in the new. The new can sometimes make us angry. It certainly makes us defensive. And so, very often, all we want to do is go running back to our narrow places. But this is what our narrow places actually do. They keep us confined. They keep us from discovering more about ourselves, more about each other, more about this life that God has given us. Our narrow places keep us stuck in our old ways of thinking and stuck in our old ways of being. Today I want to highlight a specific narrow place, but I invite you to think about the narrow places in your lives, as this week unfolds. I think we all face them, and I think we face multiple ones. So the invitation is for you to think about your narrow places and what it might take to break free and take your first steps into the freedom of the new life that God has placed before you. But today, for our purposes here in our sanctuary, I want to highlight a specific narrow place, and that is narrow-mindedness when it comes to other people's points of view. I'm hearing this a lot, and not just around here, but yes, around here too. At Eureka Christian Church and in our larger society, perhaps even the global society, we just don't seem to be allowing each other the space to be different. We are not giving each other the freedom to have different opinions or different ways of looking at the world or different responses, different interpretations, even to the same experiences. We don't have to look at things the same way. We are not giving each other the freedom to have different interpretations of what it means to be Christian or American, or even in some cases, even human, or at least behaving in humane ways. We are immediately casting each other as the other. And then we're scurrying back, quick as a flash, to our narrow places where we feel safe and justified. And what is this getting us? A whole lot of stress is what this is getting us. And tension and resentment and anger and exhaustion and disruption and disintegration and brokenness and hard feelings all around. We are collectively shackled by this narrow place. It has us bound in a venomous quagmire. I cannot believe that this is what Jesus wants for us. I cannot believe that this is what Jesus expects of us. Where is the love? Where is the life? Where is the joy, that good news of great joy, remember? We are so preoccupied by this narrow place that proclaiming, embodying, being, doing, living out the good news has taken a back seat. And that is just plain wrong. We have a higher calling. We have a higher calling than holing up in our holier than thou narrow places. This is not new, The Corinthians struggled with this too. We're going to be spending a couple of weeks with them today and then again on February 12th, unpacking their narrow place and trying to learn from them how to get ourselves out of ours. After his usual greetings, Paul launches right in, and he doesn't even try to hide how frustrated he is with them. This comes right in the first chapter, verse 10. Now I appeal to you, brothers and sisters, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that all of you be in agreement, and that there be no divisions among you, but that you be united in the same mind and the same purpose. For it has been reported to me by Chloe's people that there are quarrels among you. I mean, this is a window straight into like the first early church, right? It has been reported to me by Chloe's people that there are quarrels among you. And these were the quarrels. They were dividing into camps. I'm this kind of Christian, you're that kind of Christian, and I am better than you. Ugh! And I hear this today, too. Do any of you hear this today? The more things change, the more they stay the same. Paul goes on. What I mean is that each of you says, I belong to Paul, I belong to Apollos, I belong to Cephas, I belong to Christ. Has Christ been divided? Was Paul crucified for you? Or were you baptized in the name of Paul? I thank God that I baptized none of you except Crispus and Gaius. Can you hear how frustrated he is? He's wanting to wash his hands of the whole thing. He doesn't even want credit for baptizing any of them but the two of them, right? He's so frustrated by their behavior. But then he does something beautiful. In our scripture reading for today, it is a master class on pastoral leadership, actually. What he does is shift the conversation. Instead of taking up their arguments and weighing in on who is right and who is wrong, or instead of doing what I always find myself doing, which is trying to function as a mediator, helping each side understand the other, and let me just tell you, I am out of this role. This role is killing me. Being the bridge, trying to help one side understand the other, what it's doing is tearing me apart. So I am out of the business of mediation. You're not precisely on your own, but I am out. I will no longer be the bridge. So instead of taking up the arguments or serving as a mediator, Paul takes them in a completely different direction. All your squabbles, he says, they're irrelevant. They are totally missing the point. Hey, you guys, you are so focused on who has the superior religious wisdom here that you're forgetting it's all human wisdom, which means that it means nothing. You're wasting your time, Paul says, on these squabbles because even God's foolishness is wiser than any human wisdom. And this is the foolish wisdom of God. God chooses vulnerability over strength. God chooses love over hate. God chooses life over any power that would destroy. This is what happened on the cross. Vulnerability became strength. Love proved to be more powerful than hate, and life won. Life wins. Proclaim that, Christians. Focus on that, Christians. So here we are. A room full of people and an internet full of people. Hello. With different viewpoints. A world full of people with different viewpoints. Now, we can see these as threats, and we can spend our energy focusing on that which divides us while we throw pot shots at each other from our narrow places. But that's not where the life is. That's not where the call is either. Can you see another way? Can you see a more excellent way, perhaps? Episcopal Pastor Richard Simpson. There is a great deal of quarreling and bickering about who is right and who is wrong, and plenty of meetings after the meetings in the church parking lot, which I just have to applaud us, because that is not one of our behaviors here. It is a behavior in other churches, and it's a big old problem because, things will be decided in a meeting, an actual meeting, and then people will go to the parking lot and have another meeting, and something entirely different will be decided, and it causes great conflict. That doesn't happen here, so we should all take a moment to, There's a great deal of quarreling and bickering about who is right and who is wrong, and plenty of meetings after the meetings in the church parking lot. But, he says, we have before us an opportunity for the whole Christian community, in spite of our very real differences. We have an opportunity for the whole Christian community to encounter the living Christ in our midst. The power of God, after all, he says, is revealed wherever the love of God becomes flesh. And guess who makes that flesh, Christians? We do. We make the love of God infleshed out in the world. So let's get out there, Christians. Let's get out there to encounter the living Christ in our midst. Let's leave our narrow places and, for the love of God, let us be the Christ in the flesh out in the world. Our response is, there is a balm in Gilead, and we have an opportunity to be balm when we share the love of Christ to the hurts and the needs of the world. We have an opportunity to be that balm. There is a balm in Gilead. It's our response. It's also an invitation if you're looking for a community to be a part of. I invite you to come forward as we stand and sing together, or if you're joining us online, you can send a comment, and one of the staff will reach out to you this week. Let us stand and join together.